It is so great to be here. It is so great to be back. And every time you fly into Vancouver, I swear to God, it's like the city of Oz. It is just Oz. And I understand that yesterday it was spitting and sleeting, but I came in today, it was sunny, it was gorgeous. And my husband, Mark, always tells me, I don't know what happens with you in the Northwest weather, but it's always nice, you know? And it's not like that. And he keeps trying to tell me, it's not like that. But every time I come here, it's just like that. And so, I don't know, it's magical. And it's wonderful to be here. And I think that we've already made transformative change just in the one day that we've been here. We have a new director of transportation, right? Amazing. Amazing. It's incredible to see. But I'm really happy to be here to talk about street fight and street fights, and we know a little bit about that in New York. But before we get started, I want to recognize the 4,500 people of the New York City Department of Transportation. They are the heroes that not only took care of our bridges and our highways and our ferries, but they were the ones that implemented the changes that I'm going to talk about today. And it was really an extraordinary bit of work that they did. And one hero in particular, Seth Solomano, who is here, and he was my press secretary through it all, so he knows where all the bodies are buried. He did quite a lot of psychological counseling for me over that period of time. He's got a PhD in that now. And is my colleague at Bloomberg Associates and a great friend. And it's been wonderful writing this book with him and telling the stories and living through the work that we did. So I want to start off with a question, much like Gordon. What do you all think about when you think about a street? You think about highways, streetlights, cars, people, place, conversations. Ooh, this is sounding much better than it is in New York. But for most people, they see a scene like this, and that's what they think of with streets, you know. And streets are what make a city great and what make a city not so great. And for many years, they've been governed by this kind of dashboard view of the road. And our elected officials, and I'm so happy to see so many here tonight, would look at a scene like this, you know, in New York, not here, and say, you know, this is perfect. This is working just exactly like it should. But it wasn't always this way. And our streets used to be more like living rooms with lots of choices for getting around. This is a street you may recognize not very far from here, Hastings Street. And this is that street 100 years later. You know, you can see all of the choices whittled away. And our streets can be really lively places, but for generations they've been places for cars, with all of those devastating effects that go along with that. 33,000 people dying in the United States on roads every year, chronic congestion, lifeless streets, but it didn't happen by chance. It happened by design, and this design had an impact for how we get around on our streets. And look at this street. You don't even see any people on this street. Do you think it's because they don't want to walk? No? I mean, look, there's long blocks, wide, busy intersections. I mean, where would you even walk to? You know, I mean, who would want to walk there? And most of our roads, most of the 2.5 million roads in the United States and many here in Canada go unnoticed just like this. And it reminds me of a video game I used to play as a young child. How many of you played Frogger? Right? You know Frogger. I think it could have been called Pedestrian. And here is the real-life translation. There are so many signs for how a street wants to be used, and you can see it when people try to cross mid-block like this. And it's a sign of how our streets have let people fall through the cracks. And you look at a street like this, and you get the sense that people have actually given up. They've just given up fighting the car, and they've forgotten that it could be any different at all. Not that it was actually ever a fair fight. The national standards for our streets come from the federal government and dictate what can happen and not happen. The font on the signs, the width of our lanes. It's like the 10 Commandments, but 500 pages long, with the best clip art that money can buy. It's extraordinary clip up, truly, truly. They just forgot one thing, people. So you can actually read through all 500 pages, and I dare you, Gordon, to do that. You won't find a single person in there. And an emoji interpretation would look like this. You start with a city, build roads, stoplights, take out those pesky pedestrians, and voila, you've got fast cars and a lot of engineers celebrating. A job well done. Excellent. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can redesign, reimagine, we can reclaim our streets. It just awaits those who care and those who dare. And it helps if you understand the street, and it helps if you love your streets. And my love of the city started at a very early age, at a very granular level, at tree pit level, actually. Also started with long walks with my mom. And we would walk around the city, and she would constantly tell me to look up, to take it all in, to watch the people. And we took many walks all over town over the years. And I remember one conversation that we had, it was just shortly after David Dinkins had won the mayoral campaign, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I told her I wanted to do something that touched people's lives every day. And she said, "Sweetie, you have two choices, transportation or sanitation." She did. And clearly I picked transportation. And I love this picture with Mayor Bloomberg. It was when we launched the Select Bus service in 2010 on First Avenue. And even though we're all smiles here, I didn't feel that way when I interviewed for a job in his administration. The first question that he asked me was, "Why do you want to be traffic commissioner?" And I said, "I don't want to be traffic commissioner. I want to be transportation commissioner." And there was dead silence in the room, just complete dead silence. All the people, nobody jumped in to break the tension. So I just kept going, talking about wanted to make the city better for bikes and for people on foot and make our streets safer and congestion pricing. And again, nothing. And I left thinking that there was no way I was going to get the job, but I thought, well, at least I got to meet the mayor. It's not so bad. And I learned later that that was exactly what Mayor Bloomberg wanted to hear, because I didn't know it at the time, but they were putting the finishing touches on Plan YC, the mayor's long-term sustainability plan, which is along the lines of what you're working on here. It was trying to figure out how are we going to accommodate the 1 million more New Yorkers that are going to be moving to New York City by 2030. And they didn't want it to leak, so they didn't let me know that they were working on this, but I think he was totally bored about talking about this stuff by the time I got into the interview. But this plan had profound implications for how we were going to design our streets, and we translated that vision of a greater, greener New York City that made our lives better in neighborhoods, improved the quality of life of neighborhoods, communities, and business districts, and we translated that vision into the kind of city that we wanted to see. And by the time the Bloomberg administration was over in 2013, we'd created 400 miles of bike lanes. You've heard about the 60 plazas, 70 rapid bus lanes, launched the largest bike share program in North America, safest streets since records had been kept. But that was really the short version. The longer version is that every day was a fight to give people more choices for getting around. And every inch of that 180 acres that we took back from cars and gave back to people on foot and on bike was a battle, because we were fighting to change the culture of New York City and to set it on a new direction. And I learned a lot of lessons along the way. And the first lesson is that you can paint the city you want to see. And like any city, we had to work with the streets that we had and with the budget that we had. But you can accomplish a lot with just the supplies that you have on hand. And we wanted to show New Yorkers the world of the possible. What could be done? And this is a picture of Times Square in the 1950s. And you can see that 60 years later, not much has changed. I mean, maybe the tail fins aren't on the cars, but nothing else has changed. And when you think about it, if you didn't change your major capital asset in 50 years, do you think you'd still be in business? No. So there was a lot we could do with some imagination and some paint. And so a few months after my appointment, we painted the first pedestrian plaza in Dumbo on Pearl Street, and just literally painted the curbs. This we did over a weekend. You could paint the curbs, paint the green, throw in some tables and chairs. It didn't take years of planning. It didn't take millions of dollars. We just showed people the possibility of turning a place from a place where they parked to a place where people wanted to be. And we made these transformations all over the city, on 14th Street, where this was a traffic pattern from another era, and again, created Manhattan's first plaza. Apple store moved in. People are there all times of the day and night, eating, taking it all in. And it's really hard for people to even remember what it used to look like before. Because once you adapt a space, people adopt it. We did this in Madison Square. How many of you have been to New York City and seen these transformations? Oh, that's fantastic. So our tourism program is working. I'm happy to report back. So many of you have seen some of these intersections. Madison Square, big area in New York City, warren of traffic lanes, didn't work out, 3 lanes coming together. We created 65,000 square feet of new public space. We just coned it off. Literally, we put those orange cones out, and literally, people just materialized out of nowhere. It was Star Trek. They just landed on the planet. And here, this was an art class that came in just 2 hours after we made the transformation. It's incredible. New Yorkers are so hungry for public space. And today, it is one of the most successful public projects in New York City. And people choose to sit in the plaza rather than in the park next door just to feel the pulse of the city. And again, it didn't take a lot of money. It just took using our materials a little differently. And after creating a showcase of what was possible to sort of show New Yorkers the kinds of transformations that they could have on their streets, we took this toolkit to the crossroads of the world. And as many of you know, Manhattan's on a grid. Broadway cuts through on an angle. It creates these kinds of squares that you see here, but it also creates congestion hotspots, and it has for decades, for hundreds of years. There was probably ox cart congestion, back in the day. And people tried lots of things to try to fix it. We've got 350,000 people going through Times Square every day, a huge amount of people. And it was a very dangerous street on Broadway, because what would happen is people would trade the safety of the sidewalk for the street, because 90% of the street was given to cars, even though 90% of the traffic was people on foot. So it was big imbalance. We needed to fix that imbalance. And you could see it actually in action. You can probably still see it today, even though we've created 2.5 acres of new public space, because when people walk 4 abreast in New York City, and we can't get around them, we start to vibrate. We start to have a breakdown, and we just run into the street just to get around. It's crazy. We're actually so crazy. We did this. I thought this was the best thing ever. This is slightly off topic, but anyway. So shortly after I'd started, these people dressed up in New York City DOT uniforms, with caps and vests and all that, and they went to Fifth Avenue. And Fifth Avenue, very crowded, talking about the hunger for public space, very crowded. And they painted a line up the sidewalk on Fifth Avenue. And on one side, they painted New Yorkers, and on the other side, they painted visitors. And they enforced it, and so people were using it, and it was unbelievable. And people, the people that were there saying well, but I walk fast like a New Yorker. No, you're a visitor. You go over there. You go over there. And the thing that was astonishing, this was an art group that did this, and I got all of these comments from people that said they thought that was a great idea. Great idea. So anyway, lots of people, lots of opportunity. So I brought this idea to Mayor Bloomberg, and it was in the middle of a re-election campaign. So again, that same place where I interviewed at City Hall, again, same people around the table. And so the idea was to close Broadway in the middle of an election year to cars from 42nd to 47th Street. And went around the table. What did everybody think? Nobody thought that was a particularly good idea. And so I remember the mayor turned to me and he said, I don't ask my commissioners to do the right thing according to the political calendar. I ask my commissioners to do the right thing, period. Let's do it. And he shook my hand, and it's still one of my favorite moments of my life. And we did it as a pilot program, which really reduced the anxiety and really helped Mayor Bloomberg buy into it as well. If it worked, we would keep it. And if it didn't work, we would put it back to the way that it was. And people could start to see and touch and feel it. And, you know, because when you present things, as you all know, dry engineering drawings, modeling, people really have a hard time sort of getting their arms around it. And this went a long way for getting the buy-in of the local businesses and the residents. And it worked. I mean, people came out immediately. We put out these beach chairs. And the beach chairs became a symbol of the city. In fact, there were big T-shirts that said, "I Beach Chair New York," which I thought was fantastic. And you know, the interesting piece was nobody talked about the fact that we'd closed Broadway to cars. They just talked about the beach chairs. Did you like the color of the beach chairs? Did you like the size? I think the beach chairs are kind of tatty. What do you think about the beach chairs? So, if you've got a big project here, and I know you've got some, we can talk about them later, beach chairs. Just put out the beach chairs. That's all you need to do. And, you know, the local business improvement district, Tim Tompkins and the Times Square Alliance did a great job of programming the space. And we had art and music and dance performances of all kinds. And New Yorkers who wouldn't have been caught dead in Times Square before, they now had a great new living room to enjoy. And the reconstruction work continues today. We're doing a digital upgrade of the infrastructure, and it's now turned into a place that's truly worthy of its name, the crossroads of the world. And you can see it as it's nearing completion now. It's remade the image of New York City, and it started just with some traffic cones and some beach chairs. And I still have one of the beach chairs in my office today. It's a little piece of New York City history. But it's a model that any city can follow. And by any measure, it was a big success. And measure it we did, because I worked for a data-driven mayor. As he likes to say, in God we trust, and everyone else bring data. So we brought lots and lots of data, and we called it green light for Midtown, because we wanted to make it clear that we were going to keep traffic moving. But we also developed new ways to measure the impact on safety and mobility. And we found that 80% fewer people walking in the road, as you might imagine, motorist injuries down, pedestrian injuries down, and traffic moved even better than it had before. And we proved that last point by collecting data from 1 million taxi trips. We had put GPS devices in all 13,000 yellow cabs, and we used that data to be able to measure the traffic flow. And it was also an economic blockbuster. We saw 6 new stores open. It became one of the top 10 retail locations on the planet. Broadway tickets soared, and it was a great new model. And we used this approach on our other projects to evaluate their impact and to track not just what happened curb to curb, but also what happened at the cash register. And we saw protected bike lanes see a 50% increase in retail sales all along the corridor. We saw similar results from all our rapid bus lines. We saw similar results in our protected, in our pedestrian plazas. And these figures turned small business owners, who are our biggest opponents, into some of our strongest allies. And we moved our streets from looking at them as streets just governed by anecdote, you know, asking the local cabbie what you think, and they think, it stinks. And actually, that's a very polite interpretation of what the cabbies say. To one governed by analysis, and it's a really important point. And this methodology is available for anybody to use. And we're seeing that more and more cities around the world are recognizing that better streets are better for business. And you see that in places like Toronto, you see that in London, you see that in Auckland. And we've been collecting data on cars for generations, but you know, information on peds and bikes has been really scarce. And with every study like that, we're getting closer and closer to leveling the playing field. But economics aside, there is nothing more important than the safety of our streets. and saving lives. And we did a lot of work to analyze the cause of the crashes on our streets, and we analyzed 7,000 crashes, largest traffic study ever done in the United States, to find out the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why of these traffic crashes. And we committed to cutting traffic fatalities in half by 2030. And the analysis, the findings that we had, we used to drive every single project that we did. It informed all of the work that we did in the city. And this data-driven approach is now being adopted by mayors all across the world who are adopting the Vision Zero commitment. And you're seeing that Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, because they understand that with analysis and leadership, that these fatalities and crashes can be predicted and they can be prevented. And it really illustrates that great ideas can cross borders and that no one has a patent on pavement. Every city's unique, but we all face the same challenges, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So when you see a good idea in some place, it might be in New York, it might be in San Francisco, it might be in Medellin, Colombia, try it out on your own streets. I did that. Shortly after starting, I went to Bogota to check out their ciclovia, and I was so amazed at the idea of transferring the power from drivers to people for a day. I mean, it was really an incredible concept. And so we imported it, and we created the Summer Streets program. How many have done Summer Streets? Anybody ridden the Summer Streets program? Oh, our tourism needs to be much better on this. So I invite you now this summer to come to Summer Streets. Let me know if you're coming. And we'll head out on a Saturday afternoon, and we close it from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m., actually more in the morning. If you're not a morning person, that's a problem. But we close it on Park Avenue and to cars, and we do all sorts of running, playing, dancing, cha-cha, swimming, zip lines, climbing walls, swimming in the shadow of Grand Central. 300,000 people come out every day to play, and every day we tried something new. And we also borrowed the bus rapid transit idea from Bogota and dedicated lanes. And they turned trips that used to take hours into minutes. And it was a great lesson for New York City because we have the largest bus fleet in North America and the slowest bus speeds. In fact, every year there's a contest in Midtown between a bus and a trike. And every year, guess who wins? Yeah, it's the trike. In fact, my chief engineer used to say that, Janette, the only way to get across town is to be born there. So that was a problem. So we created a program we called Select Bus Service with dedicated lanes that were enforced by cameras to ticket cars that got in the way, gave the buses the green light, held it for them longer, all-door boarding, off-board fare collection. We put it 7 lines, all 5 boroughs, travel times down 20%, ridership up 10%, a huge home run, and we saw a big bang at the fare box and along the retail corridor, 71% increase for small businesses along the way, which put a few more myths in the notion that free parking and travel lanes are the drivers of economic growth. Yeah. So we also checked out Copenhagen. There's Jan Gehl in Copenhagen and John Orcutt. And just like about everybody else in American traffic management, we'd never seen a protected bike lane. We'd never seen one before. And we thought, after touring the city with Jan Gehl, there must be a better way. And we translated this idea from Copenhagen onto 9th Avenue in Manhattan. It was the first protected bike lane we put down there, and it was the first protected bike lane in America. And we did that in months. And parking and people traded space. We just pushed the cars out, and they are the barrier to protect the cyclists. It's a fantastic idea. And it was the start of a whole new era for cyclists in New York City, and we did this in corridors all across the city. We also worked very hard to build a biking backbone for New York. This is our system in 2007. And this is it in 2013. And I love doing this because it looks so easy. You just go like that, and they're there. It's like, woo. bike lanes, no problem. We just put them in, there they go, yeah. I go do this all day, no problem with the bike lanes. Yeah. But today, these are the kinds of scenes that you see on our streets. You know, women and families out biking, and it all started with a trip to Copenhagen. And we're seeing now these protected bike lanes explode everywhere around the world. We've got 200 plus miles in the United States alone since the first lane was built almost 10 years ago. And I think it's thanks to word of mouth and organizations like NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. It's a mouthful. It sounds like it's an invading troop of the UN. And maybe it should be, because NACTO is doing this great work, and Vancouver is a member of NACTO. And I am hopeful that we, in the near future, host a NACTO event with the city of Vancouver, which I think would be terrific. And the kinds of NACTO guidance that's out there has helped cities like Los Angeles move forward with a protected bike lane. And you know there's a seismic shift underway when Los Angeles is building protected bike lanes. And as you've seen, when you do good work, people well outside your city take notice. And you can see the impact of your projects on faraway lands. In here, Seattle, Indianapolis, and Chicago, and Atlanta. And there are a lot of great ideas out there. You just need to take in the world of the possible and the almost possible. I mean, you see a street like this. This could be a street anywhere. It could be a street here. And you can imagine in the not too distant future all of that empty asphalt being put to new use. And I think we're just beginning to wrestle with the advent of driverless cars and the possibility to repurpose that 50 to 85% of asphalt and use it for more walking and biking and affordable housing and green infrastructure. It's just really important that we all focus on not repeating the mistakes that we've made of turning our city centers over to cars. But there are possibilities on our streets right here, right now. And like Yogi Berra said, you can observe a lot just by watching. And let me show you what I mean in following the people. Here, this is on 51st Street between 6th and 7th Avenue. People would not walk. It's a long block, so people would not walk on 51st to the corners. You know, they incapable of doing that. And so they would cross mid-block. And it created a tremendous number of crashes and injuries. And so we channeled a little Harry Potter, and we created 6.5 Avenue. And we did that for an entire plaza area, all 8 blocks, so people would walk all the way through, all the way down from 51st to 59th on 6.5 Avenue. But it's the theory that matters, and this theory of following the footsteps applies almost everywhere you look. You can see it in the trampled grass here in a sidewalk in the Bronx, and it was sending us a message that by looking where people are walking today, you can see the city of tomorrow. And following the people doesn't stop with street design. We turned the entire community engagement process on its head, and we asked communities where they wanted us to put these plazas and let them apply for it. And so they took ownership and organized the local political community, organized the local businesses, and took ownership of these places that they went on to create. And by following the people and giving them power, you can truly transform a city. And this wasn't just about plazas. People were also asking for safer streets. And so we created a neighborhood slow zone program with distinctive signs and narrowed streets, and we asked people where they should be installed. And we installed them all over the city. And communities could apply for anything from sidewalk seats to bike corrals to bike racks, and even cool new David Byrne bike racks, which I think are very amazing. And I think there should be a tour. I will organize personally a tour of the David Byrne bike racks now. I'm going to do it just for people in Vancouver who are here at this conference, because I'm so inspired, because you guys are so great. And, you know, we also worked with local artists to transform the canvas of our streets. You know, we've got a tremendous amount of canvas when you think about it. And you've got such an artistic community here. To harness that artistic community and have them transform our streets here would be amazing. You know, in art and sculpture, even bridges, you know, cool lighting, and even pedestrian things like concrete barriers, or the space that can be created before your new bike share stations. This is what we did in Times Square and under tunnels, which hadn't seen people in 125 years. And in a city where this used to pass as public seating, which is really not great for people with kids or seniors, we created a bench program and asked people to recommend where we should put them. And we also started a system of wayfinding signs. We have a great system of signage for cars, not such a great system of signs for people. And we actually did a survey, and we found out that at any given time, 10% of New Yorkers are lost. You've probably met them. They were the ones that said, go that way, right? Yeah, 10%. And that's just the 10% that would admit it, you know? So we set about making it easier for people to get around and asked for their input as part of the process. Because the public domain is the public's domain. And they will do everything they can to improve it, to defend it, to put it back to the way that it was. And so a government looking to do big things will naturally have, and you all see this here, a push-pull relationship with community groups. And building the relationship with community groups is as important as anything that you put down in concrete, asphalt, and steel. New York City has 59 community boards, 130 elected officials, so lest you think you've got the process madness here, we had a lot of process there. We did 2,000 meetings a year, face-to-face meetings, town halls, charrettes, open houses, you name it, we did it. We had everybody out every night, and every project went through extensive review. Bridge projects, road projects, our city bike planning process, 65,000 people gave station suggestions online. We did 400 meetings in person, and this is crucial. This hands-on approach is crucial for winning public support. And the advocacy community played a crucial role, and there is a growing coalition of New Yorkers that are passionate about taking back their streets. Eric McClure, Paul Steely-White at Transportation Alternatives, Clarence Eckerson, Brad Lander, and more. And they've done the hard work of collecting signatures, and I know that we've got incredible advocates in this room that do the hard work of pounding the pavement, of raising consciousness, of actually getting out there and demonstrating and making the case for safer streets. So I want us all to give a big hand for the advocacy community that's doing so much to make Vancouver a better place. It's essential work. It's essential work, and it's very hard, and it's grueling. And advocates like Families for Safe Streets in New York City took ownership of this critical issue, and they challenged and channeled their excruciating loss into meaningful action. And here they reduced the speed limit in New York City. And they're making sure that Vision Zero is more than just another slogan. And we're seeing this kind of advocacy all across the country. And if I've made any of this seem easy, that we just wave the wand and it's just there, it's not. There were bumps along the road. And this is a famous bike lane, a famous place. It's called Prospect Park West. And the community asked us to fix it. It had been a lot of speeding on that street, and cyclists were riding on the corridor. And so we put in a two-way bike lane. Now it's the most famous bike lane in the world. And it reduced speeding by 75%, cycling quadrupled, nobody riding on the sidewalk. All good, right? Just fantastic. But not really so much. As I learned early on, when you push the status quo pushes back hard. And these are protesters who actually came out to object to the lane, saying that slower speeds somehow made the street less safe. And one local newspaper called it the most contested slab of concrete outside the Gaza Strip. For this bike lane, right? And you can see what was so objectionable. A nightmare, a nightmare. Who would want to live near this? I'm actually still being sued on this bike lane, believe it or not. You know, the 6 years after it was in. If that lawsuit was a child, it'd be old enough to ride in this bike lane. It's crazy. But backlash is not just a New York phenomenon, and you have all been there, and you know the symptoms, like when you start seeing these kinds of headlines, you know, and a surreal part of the backlash is having to defend actions that make streets safer rather than defending them in their dangerous status quo state. But you need to stand your ground and make your policy not on press, but based on fact. And when we launched City Bike, 6,000 bikes, 330 stations, we did the biggest outreach in transportation history in New York City. We knew that it would be popular, but we also knew that we would be criticized along the way. And a local magazine analyzed why City Bike elicited such strong reactions, that New Yorkers didn't like anything healthy, environmental, that involved sharing, or was vaguely French. That last part especially. Yeah. And the tipping point in this backlash came from, yeah, you've seen it, right? How many have seen this? Okay, so it's this Wall Street journalist who, in this video rant against bikes in New York, called us bike crazed, and she said she represented the majority of New Yorkers who were opposed to the bikes and they begrimed the city. And also said that the advocates were part of an all-powerful bike lobby that was working with a totalitarian mayor. And so, of course, we all went out and we got these buttons that said all-powerful bike lobby. Right? But my hero, Jon Stewart, really told it like it was. Yeah. They're just effing bikes. Just effing bikes. And I think backlash is a sign that you are doing something right. And it's what happens when you challenge the status quo and you move to a new road order. And today, a typical rider looks more like the guy on the right than the Mad Max rider on the left. And it's a major step. Bikes becoming a normal part of commuting, of running errands, of even getting married. And, you know, we didn't even stage this one. I thought that was, like, so good. My friend Doug Gordon, typical scene, out with his family. And it is popular. And people are ahead of the press and the politicians when it comes to better streets. And by the end of the Bloomberg administration, we found 73% of New Yorkers supported bike share. 72% of New Yorkers supported the plazas. 64% of New Yorkers supported bike lanes. If this had been an election, it would have been a landslide. And you could see just how much had changed 6 months ago when the new administration thought about ripping out the plazas to deal with the desnudas, and the costume characters, you know, Elmo, Little Kitty, Hello Kitty, that were soliciting tips from tourists. And let's just say it did not go over so well. Once the idea was floated, New Yorkers came out in droves to defend not only Times Square, but all of the plazas. And, you know, 6 years ago, people had been so opposed to taking the cars out of Broadway and Times Square. And today, few could imagine putting them back in. It is a new status quo. And you're starting to see this new status quo on your streets. York Avenue. Ooh, that's not changing. Oh, there we go. Commercial Drive, Parklet. And these aren't aspirational drawings from some distant, faraway land. These are changes that have happened on your streets. And you need to fight for them. You need to bike them. You need to vote for them. You need to ask your elected officials to build more of them. And we know it's a fight. It is a fight to make space for people. It's a street fight, but it is a fight that we can win, and it is a fight that we must win. Because when you change your street, you change the world. Thank you.
Oh, you changed that. a darn good read. I think because it gives you places to go and look and see New York, particularly on a city bike.
Yes.
Get you off Manhattan.
Yes.
I was there, as I told you, not more than 24 hours ago. Just go out and explore, look at the city.
You look good with jet lag.
Yeah, so far, adrenaline. I brought you back 2 images to show you.
Okay.
Frank?
I'm gonna need like something to drink to go along with this. This is scary.
Something harder than water, perhaps?
Yes, do you have that? I would like that, please.
We've got it in the back for you.
Okay, excellent.
So the first one is the bad news. You still need more space for pedestrians in Times Square.
Yeah, no, I pointed that out.
Yeah, but the second one, this is one of my favorite, I think, New York shots that I will keep.
Oh yeah,
I
that's
think
great.
you've seen that guy doing that in the city. Not when you started.
No, not when I started, but it's a typical scene now.
Yeah, typical.
Yeah. Street's not looking so good though.
Yeah.
New
But you know,
administration.
it's surprisingly safe. I mean, I've cycled across town, which, as you say, is an experience. But I think it's because the traffic is going with you.
Well, I think part of it is too that we've actually designed our streets. Is this echoing? Is this okay? It's okay? Okay. You know, our streets actually really looked like the Wild Wild West. You know, I mean, there was no order to them, right? And so we made them better for people on foot and on bike and on bus, but also drivers, right? Because you needed to create a pathway that made sense. And so by organizing the streets, dedicated turn lanes, you know, through lanes, even by reducing the width of the lanes, you could actually make traffic flow better. And I think that's kind of the secret, is that after all of the 400 miles of bike lanes, after all of the plazas, all of the bus lanes, by the end of the administration, traffic flowed better after than it did before.
I found that if I showed a reasonable amount of respect for the drivers and the pedestrians, they would show me on a bike a reasonable amount of respect. Now, that's not a New York experience that I would.
No, it's not. Actually, we worked hard on that. We did a cycling campaign when we started out, a very subtle one, like New York does, and so it was called "Don't Be a Jerk."
Yeah. Let me give you the quote that surprised me the most in your book.
Okay.
Achieving Jane Jacobs' vision requires Moses-like vision. Now, we got to explain that.
Yeah.
I think most people here know James Jacobs.
Yeah.
We're not referring to the Moses that parted the Red Sea. The Robert Moses
Kind
of
of
New
was
York
like
had more
that.
power, I think you
Yeah.
could say. But could you explain, well, tell them who Robert Moses was and why you wrote that, because that did kind of surprise me.
Yeah. Robert Moses was a big master builder, and he built something like 17 parkways, and he basically, think of him as basically Oz of highway building, and he built huge bridges, Verrazano. I could go through all of the work that he did, but he was the public works master that built all of the highway network, destroyed a lot of neighborhoods in the process, but he moved fast and completely changed the foundation of New York City with this highway building. Jane Jacobs, urbanist, as you know, and she lives in my neighborhood. Where she lived is just several blocks away from me, and she had a very different view of our streets. Robert Moses was all about moving cars as fast as possible, mostly move them out of the city into the suburbs, because who would want to live in the city? Jane Jacobs, all about the beauty of the city, the ballet of the city, the fact that sidewalk contacts are the small change from which a city's public life's wealth grows. And so very different views. But Jane Jacobs' logic these days, people in communities use this logic about no, nothing big here, we don't want to see anything done. It's like they want to preserve everything as it is. And so they use Jane Jacobs' logic to fight Jane Jacobs-like projects. And that's bizarre, to sort of see, but this notion that, that people won't sign up for anything. And I think we need to have the lens of Jane Jacobs and what the street is about. It's about people, it's about life, it's about those small contacts that change, with Robert Moses' vision in terms of getting things done, right? It's that muscular getting things done quickly. And so marrying the two can be very powerful. So you need to actually have, I think, the two going together, because we've seen in community board after community board in New York City, just this knee-jerk no, no, no. And we have to create an agenda that people can get to yes with.
Inaction is inexcusable.
Inaction is inexcusable.
Janette Sadik-Khan.
Yes. Are we done now? That was a perfect line. Excellent. Get to work.
Well, you gave a pretty good explanation of Times Square. And we all think of it as one of the great achievements of public space. You did explain how it also helped traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt maybe Streetfight is not quite the right title for what you're actually telling us.
Do you have a better
You never
one?
went out and looked for the fights. I think you are a warrior, but I don't think that's the way you approached the strategies.
Well, no, you're right. We didn't go out looking for a fight. We didn't strap on boxing gloves, although it felt like it at times. But it's what happens when you change the status quo, is that people get, upset. And so it creates you do end up having battles. Changing the status quo is a fight. It is a fight. People feel very passionate about their streets, and I get that. I love that people feel passionate about their streets, but we have to be able to show that they can be used differently. And I think we haven't done enough of a good job about that, about showing the world of the possible in our streets. And so, but when you're changing how they look and how people have experienced them, and look, let's face it, people don't really have a good experience with this notion like, hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. It doesn't go so well so you can see the kind of resistance to that. But to your point, we actually did a big change in how we did community involvement.
Yeah.
And so we started by changing the question that we went to communities with. Normally, you come from the New York City DOT and you sat at a table and you'd present your project, and then it'd be like, questions? And then didn't get such a good response. So we went to community boards and started with a different question, which is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And when you start with this question, you build up a very different relationship, and you have a different conversation. And you may end up with a bike lane or the bus lane or whatever, but because these projects do a lot to reduce speeding and address some of the concerns that are there, but you have a very different relationship. And so I think that was a critical part of the transformation, that sort of alchemy that happened at the community board level, was moving from I'm just telling you how the process goes, to you are part of this transformation.
And I also saw that you did that with the business community.
Yes.
You spent a lot of time and work with them.
Yes, we did. And it was really important, particularly, it worked in two ways. Big projects like Times Square, obviously Madison Square, those big iconic projects obviously had to get the buy-in. And we worked very quietly, very early on, just having very quiet conversations. And again, the strategy of trying things out, just try it out, pilot it. You can get so much buy-in from people, because the bottom line is, you can't argue that our streets are so perfect that you can't try anything. Right? We know that they've got a lot of, issues. And so business people understand that. So if you can say, look, we'll test it out, and they do believe that you'll put it back, that's how we got the early buy-in for those big projects. But we also got buy-in with small businesses, with the business improvement districts that were involved in maintaining all of the plazas. Mike Bloomberg felt very, very strongly after the experience of the 1980s, where there was a big public space program that was created, but the spaces weren't maintained. And that led to a lot of garbage-strewn places, homeless people living there. And so he set a policy up that no public space would be created unless there was a plan to have it maintained.
Well, to give a plug to one of our sponsors, the Downtown BIA, they have emerged more and more with exactly that attitude, I think.
Well, where's the guy from the BIA?
All right, Charles.
So important. Give that man money and support. Yeah.
Real estate.
Real estate.
Big business. New York, biggest change I guess I've seen on the skyline is
Oh,
432 Park. It's one of these super tall buildings.
Yeah.
Billionaires Row.
Billionaires Row.
Now, you got to have heard this. People are thinking you've done some great changes, but what you're doing is helping the gentrification of the city. Where's the equity or the social justice of this?
Well, I think that transportation is about social justice, and it is about providing choices for everybody, not just some. And so the transportation programs that we had were all 5 boroughs, citywide, in every neighborhood. And, it's interesting when you think about it. People think, oh, Manhattan is just like Billionaires Row, but there are also lots of places in Manhattan where, it's not, you've got distressed neighborhoods in every part of the city. But what we have to do is make it affordable for people to get around and live and stay and play and raise families. We need to have an affordable housing strategy that's married to a transit-oriented development strategy, and one that recognizes that, when you force people to drive, when you design our streets so that they have to get around only by car, you're passing on a tremendous amount of cost onto people. It's $10,000 to operate a car. That's $10,000 that can go for a mortgage, for school, for health care, for child care, for lots of important things. And so I think it's an equity issue in the lack of choices that we've provided for getting people around. So making that happen is one of the most important strategies that we can do.
Do you actually see, though, who's the guy up there? Looks professional? Well, he's got a tie.
Is that
What about the
makes
guys
a
without
professional?
ties?
That's an outdated kind of idea.
That might kind of get me in trouble.
I'm getting you in trouble yet.
Yeah, but are you seeing that great diversity of New York?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I don't know. Has anybody been out on the city bike? Have you seen? So you see the diverse people out there on city bikes. I mean, from all walks of life, all shapes, colors, sizes, people. It's just everybody is out there. And we do have reduced price for people for low-income New Yorkers, and we worked very, very hard to make sure that bike share stations were next to our public housing, and I think we need to do more with that. I think equity in bike share and bike lanes is an area that needs more work. We're doing it at NACDO, and so if you're interested, you can follow up on that. But we really need to up our game even more on the equity side in terms of that.
Well, it's a good time to ask you any other advice that you would give us. We're just going to have bike share imminently. What should we be? Well, let me ask you this. Got any thoughts on compulsory helmet laws?
I do. Ditch them. I mean, it's really every single bike share program in the world that's had compulsory helmets has gone down. And you're seeing now countries and cities repealing these laws. Because it's a big dampening effect on ridership. And really, what we're trying to get to is the safety in numbers effect. The more people riding, the safer your streets are. We've had 25 million rides on City Bike, not a single fatality. 25 million rides. Right? It's not about what you wrap around your head. It's how you design your streets.
Yeah, that's a start. Good data.
Good data, exactly.
Now, another piece of data that really surprised me. You're expecting another 1 million people in New York for the next 30 years. In the next 30 years,
By 2030, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. That's what we're saying in this region. We'll have another 1 million people in about the same time.
Yeah.
Whoa! I mean, there's a bit of a difference between Metro Vancouver and you're talking New York City. What? That's 8 million people.
Yes.
Got any advice for us?
Well, I think you're starting the right road with the having a plan. I think it's really important to have a plan about how you're going to do that accommodating, because it will transform every aspect of the city. It affects energy, transportation, housing, school, crime, water, you name it, it affects it. And so if we can create, if we can leverage the density that we have in our cities, which is the real asset, one of the big assets we have in our city, then we're going to actually be able to have a city, I think, that really is one that when we open the door in 2030, we like what we see. And if not, we're not going to be double-decking our roads and bridges, and pursuing the same strategies is not going to get us to where we need to be in 30 years.
You said that New York discovered its density. What did you mean by that?
Well, we recognized the value of the density. I mean, in the past, cities, the density was seen as a bad thing, right? It was something to run away from. So people moved out to the suburbs. I mean, and I think what we've discovered with Plan YC was that density is destiny, that we can create a much better city and take advantage of the density that we have to create the city that we want.
What have you seen in Vancouver? I know it's...
All like 4 hours?
Yeah, all 4 hours. But you've got eyes to see.
I do.
And you've clearly done some research. So what do you think we're doing? Well, of course I'm going to ask, what do you think we're doing right? But really what might be most valuable is, where do you think we need to make some changes?
I think Vancouver is a example for many cities around the world. I think the fact that you didn't start by building highways through your center city is huge. I mean, that's a problem that so many cities are trying to claw that back, and you didn't do that. And I think your housing and transit-oriented development policies and your transit investment is really what you need to be continuing to build on. And I know that the referendum didn't pass, and that's really too bad. And it's sad because I think it actually reflects even more than a defeat of the referendum, which it didn't seem like it was, as much as it was a referendum on the TransLink, management. And in these days, it's so easy to vilify government. And it's just so easy to take one little piece and say, oh, that means the whole thing is wrong. And big projects and transportation, it's messy. It's messy work, and it's hard work. And having the funding to get to where you need to go is a challenge. And so I think you'll get there with the next referendum, but I think that doubling down on your transit investment and doubling down on your density and creating more walkable, bikeable spaces is going to be really key, because you've got, like I said, your Oz, your Oz, so you just got to, make it a little greener and make it a little easier to get around and get that affordable housing going.
God, I didn't realize it would be so easy.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like the bike lanes. You just boom, boom, draw them. They're there.
Well, speaking of which, we do have a local issue here. This is very local for Vancouver. One block, 800 block Robson Street, where an important commercial street, important transit street, and also a very successful public space when we close it off for a few months. But if you really want to get a good blog conversation going, just bring up 800 Robson Street and you'll hear very many different opinions. Is it a good idea, do you think, to close off a street completely?
Well, that's what we did in Times Square.
But you had 7th Avenue, you had an alternative.
And everybody said, oh, it's going to be Carmageddon, there's no way around, how are many people going to get through? You know what, they figure it out. They drive around, it's fine. It's fine. Close it, try it out, do it, Try it, you like it.
Everything, I think if I got the quote here, nothing I have said denies the importance of cars. Do I have that quote right? Nothing I've said denies the importance of cars. Mm-hmm. So what's that importance?
Well, I mean, these strategies are not anti-cars. Cars have a role in cities. It's just pro-choice, right? It's about choices. It's about balance. We've been so, driven toward cars for this whole period of time that everything else that we've been like pedestrians and cyclists and transit riders have been left with as scraps, after all of the space has been carved out for the cars. So we're about bringing back those choices and bringing about, a better balanced city. And that's what those strategies are about.
Yeah, if I can make a comment, it's certainly true where we have a half century or more of giving or streets to the car, people have just grown up thinking, hey, that's the way it was meant to be.
Yes, exactly. It's so funny because they've actually forgotten, and that's why I think
Yeah.
that some of those slides were important, is to show that potential, because people that don't have any other idea that they can be used differently, and you can skinny down the streets, and you can, you don't actually have to have $1 billion program to build in different ways of getting around and showing how you can create much safer streets, much more attractive and vital streets.
Safety has always been the important word in traffic management, isn't it? So if you can use that argument, this
Yeah.
is going to be safer.
Yeah, well, our streets are sick. They're sick, and it's tragic that we have thousands and thousands of people dying on our streets, and it's just seen as like, oh yeah, that's just life in the city. People die. What is that? No, if this was any other field, you'd lose your job, right? You don't get to 33,000 people dead, but you're fine. Nicely done, So we're trying to do a better job with that, and we can do a better job with that, and we can make our cities so much better and safer for everyone. And we're an aging city, we're aging, so we need to look at making our streets, better at every age
And healthier.
and healthier.
I think that I hear more and more is the theme of our time.
Oh yeah, well, in the United States, you guys are skinny up here in Vancouver. Well, we're like lardos down. It's not lardos. Please don't say that. Please don't. We have an obesity problem in the United States. And so active transportation is a very important component, a very important strategy for addressing that. Yeah. Seriously, walking and biking and getting out of your car
Right.
is really important for the health of the country. And
True. Get a doctor's prescription for active transportation in your
They're
cities.
doing that.
Yeah.
I think that's really a great strategy.
Now, we have asked you to hashtag Streetfight if you've got questions, and we have people. Are we getting some? Well, a few? Okay, we'll come back to that, but now's the time. Because I've just got a few more questions here. One is a quote from your father. Mud balls on the wall.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us what's sticking on the walls these days. Better explain the quote.
My dad used to always say to me, and these were usually in times when I was having trouble figuring out what I was going to go do. And he was constantly talking about, throw mud balls. Just throw mud balls. Keep throwing mud balls against the wall and see what sticks. Just keep trying new things and see what sticks. And he always felt like you were not doing a good enough job if you weren't constantly trying new things, that was a really important thing to do, is to keep trying things. So I think the mud balls that are sticking these days are very much along the lines of what we talked about. I think you're seeing just this incredible renaissance of bike lanes and plazas and bike share and rapid bus, and cities are. I think it's really exciting to see cities being almost in competition with one another. Who can be greener? Who can build the most protected bike lanes? Who can build the most plazas?
Yeah,
and so we're seeing that. I think the other challenge on the horizon is going to be with how we deal with transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, and how do we set the table properly to ensure that we actually have the city that we want to see, not only with TNCs, but also with driverless cars. And so that conversation is a very important one right now, that we do that design right and we have that conversation right and we make sure that everybody's at the table when we have that conversation.
I found one of the most interesting chapters in your book just on issues of the future, maybe because with our next generation transportation online course, it's exactly that. What should we be looking to? And you've got some really interesting observations here. Demand in your hand, what you call TNCs, the Helsinki model. Tell us a bit more about this.
It's a secret thing. You got to read the book. Got to read the book. No, I think what we're starting to see is more on-demand transportation. That's a sort of mobility in your hand piece. So, and the Helsinki model is really interesting because they're adapting their city and building in different kinds of mobility that supports a strategy that you would almost like have one card that would entitle you to X number of days for or miles for driving, would give you a budget that would have public transport, bike share, car share, all on one, mobility card. And so you wouldn't have to own anything. You just had this mobility card that you were able to use to get what you needed off of this menu. It's such a smart strategy. And they're actually building in the mobility options, building in that system right now, so that the city infrastructure reflects this policy and this new program. So it remains to be seen how it works, but I think it's a really interesting model, and one that, particularly when you see, fewer and fewer people are even bothering to get licenses. You see what's happening in terms of the shared economy. We absolutely have to change the way that we organize and think about our systems, given that and given what people want today. And so it's a really exciting time, I think. Transportation's been kind of a little sleepy until recently, and I think it's just exploding now with opportunity and some of that really happening because of the technology that's coming to our streets.
What we're doing in this region, or at least what the province is doing, is proposing to build some of the widest bridges and infrastructure really in the world. Multi-billion-dollar 10-lane bridges, proposals for building highways up the Coast Mountains. I mean, it really is an astonishing commitment of resources at this particular point in time. What I'm interested in is your perspective that you see now around the states, at the state and federal level, about these kind of really huge financial commitments.
Well, we're actually starting to see, I think there's starting to be a recognition that when you build more lanes, you just build in more traffic, right? And and this is actually not a new phenomenon. Louis Mumford in the 1950s talked about, solving congestion by building more roads is like loosening your belt to solve obesity, right? I mean, it just doesn't work.
He was the guy who said that.
Huh?
He was the guy who said that.
Yeah, he was the guy that said that.
We hear that quote.
Yeah, and so we've known this for years and years that this strategy doesn't work, but we've had this highway hypnosis about what we needed to do, which was to build more roads. And I think now there's a recognition that you can't keep building more roads and expect that you're going to build your way out of congestion. You'll just end up in a sea of brake lights. If that worked, if that strategy worked, building more roads, to reduce congestion, you'd see freeways in Los Angeles and Houston and all around just flowing at highway speed, right? But they're just stuck in traffic the same way. So you'd think we'd figure this out, after all of these years. And we're seeing that the cities that are really making those big investments in transit and alternative ways of commuting are really seeing the best results.
Are you seeing that change, though, reflected at the state and federal level, where the big bucks are?
Well, I don't know how it is here. What we're starting to see in the States is really the action is really happening at the city level. Really, the innovation is happening at the city level. Yeah. And, for us in the United States, the last big idea that we had out of the United States Department of Transportation was the interstate highway system, right? Check, we did that. So, we're seeing the innovation at the local level, like I'm saying, right?
Yeah. That's a familiar story. Now, listen, I've got a question here. I don't even know if it's very appropriate.
Then maybe we should turn to the audience.
Don't you want to know what it is?
Nope.
Oh, yes, you do. You, Jennifer Keesmaat, planner of Toronto, Amanda Burden, planning commissioner, many of the women in this room, increasingly are making the real changes in urban design and planning. At least, well, here's what I'm asking, because it's not a question I would ask. I would say there's a lot of men doing this. What do women bring to?
I think it's an exciting moment to see, I'm actually excited to see the young people that are coming up in transportation. That's the piece that really, I'm really excited about. Men, women, for me, it's actually the enthusiasm and the different ideas, that you see coming up and just breaking through, old paradigms and having no patience for, old ways of doing business. And I think that disruptive philosophy, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, is what is really making a huge transformative difference. I do think, yeah. That's to you all. That's to all of you. So I think I'll leave it there. I already got into trouble earlier.
So we have some questions from the audience here. Great, thank you.
Wow, they're in indexed cards. Mm-hmm. Very organized here. Can we shuffle and decide?
Hey. No, I'm just going to start reading them.
Oh, okay.
With the onset of driverless cars on the horizon, are parking minimums today just building stranded assets?
Yes.
Okay.
Next.
I don't know if you can answer this one, but I would sure be interested in the answer. If you were the Transportation Commissioner of Vancouver, what would you do with our viaducts now? You have to know what our viaducts are. Are you familiar with that at all?
Nope, not familiar at all.
Okay. It's basically the last little piece that we ever built of the proposed freeway network.
Well, you're seeing, what I think I could say is that you're seeing in city after city people taking down the viaducts and to really kind of restore the street grid. Or even, you've seen in, I think it's Toronto, Jennifer is looking at activating the space underneath the viaduct and kind of transforming it. So basically doing whatever you can to kind of, reclaim the space from the car is what you're starting to see.
Have you been to Toronto on this tour yet? Or proposed?
No, I haven't been to the tour.
So I'm sure they'll ask you about the Gardner as to whether they should have torn that down.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I have a good answer. And when I'm in Toronto,
Can you give us a
stay
hint?
tuned.
All right. If pedestrian and bike volumes are lower, like in the suburbs, does the strategy change?
Lower?
Yeah, if you're dealing in places that have very low use at this point.
Oh, low volume.
Yeah, low volume.
Oh, it's really, it's creating the network that's key. You really need to focus on creating, you probably have a master plan. Do you have a master plan? Yeah. So finishing out that master plan and making the connections that people want to go to, that's key. I mean, obviously high volume locations are a big indication of the demand, but you'd be surprised about what you can do when you are actually building out to communities that you wouldn't even expect would necessarily be supportive. And in fact, what we found, frankly, is that in some of the some areas with high bike volume, some of the community boards were the most opposed. So it's a balancing act.
Well, what do you say in New Jersey, where they have, say, communities that were built
I say
out
nothing
entirely?
about New Jersey.
That's so unfair.
It's totally
All right,
fair.
Connecticut.
It's totally fair.
What do you say to places that were built out as suburbs in the post-war period, entirely around the car, the cul-de-sac, the arterial road? What should they do if they have limited resources and low public support?
I say you do. It's basically what we did in New York. I look at Robert Moses' highway building legacy as this incredible opportunity for us to repurpose it. And so it's, again, you can just stripe these lanes. You can build these out. You've got an incredible platform. When you think about it, a lot of European cities, very narrow streets, much more difficult challenge to try to get it into a very narrow, almost medieval city that has roads that are basically as big as your head.
Right.
So there's the opportunities are literally hidden in plain sight right in front of you. So it doesn't take a lot of time. That doesn't take a lot of money. I would begin right there.
Yeah. I've noticed that difference between Amsterdam and Copenhagen. Amsterdam, the very narrow city, a lot of problems actually with that, the amount of cycling they've got.
Yeah.
Whereas Copenhagen has some nice big wide roads that they've been able to repurpose.
Right.
Have there been any studies, speaking of data, on the changes in chronic disease rates in New York, even since the changes in this very short time, but do we have any data on the effects of what you've achieved in the city?
We don't have that at the Department of Health. But there have been really good studies that have been done in other cities, and I think London has been great on that. But we didn't do any, in terms of the time frame, we didn't actually have that done by the Department of Health.
It's going to be really valuable stuff to get.
It is. Is anybody here working on that here?
Megan is, she has cancer.
All right, Megan. So Megan is working on this.
Okay. This is good news.
Good news.
Well, we're going to keep inviting you back because clearly whenever you're here, the weather is great.
Yeah.
So what are some of the strategies for public spaces in rainy climates?
You know, rain, shine, snow, public space is public space all times of the year. And, you know, you see that when you travel into countries, you know, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, we talked about that. You know, people out there with their little blankets and they're, you know, enjoying their coffees. I don't think it's an issue. People said that about the plazas and you know, nobody's going to use them, and they're used all year long. And so I don't think that's a concern.
Okay. How important was the political leadership of Bloomberg's administration to success? You've touched on it, but perhaps you could tell us more about how important the politics of leadership was.
Well, I mean, I did have the great fortune of working for a politically courageous mayor who was really about innovation as usual and not business as usual. And he loved new ideas and he loved trying things out. And if you weren't trying new things out, you were kind of doing something wrong. Yeah. And so, I mean, but, you know, there was a big backlash at one point. You know, the tabloids really were calling, I mean, lots of nasty names on a fairly regular basis. And, I mean, he also had a saying that, like, if the tabloids, you know, attack you, you know, you have a job for life in my administration. And I thought that was great. And actually, the New York Post turned it on its head and basically wrote this editorial that said, "Please don't fire Janette," which was, I thought, a really interesting kind of a twist. But yeah, having somebody that's got your back through thick and thin really matters. It really matters a lot. And the other piece I think that matters a lot, though, is that, you know, you'll find that people are really get the importance of better streets and safer streets and better performing streets. And they're ahead of the politicians, and they're ahead of the press. And so once you can get over that first bump, you know, and show what's possible, you know, they like what they see.
Yeah, once you get there.
Once you get there. But it's moving quickly is a really important strategy, and showing the potential and piloting things out and trying things. Try things.
Did you manage to change anything when it came to on-street parking in New York?
We did. We did change on-street parking a lot. In fact, that was some of our biggest fights were over on-street parking. And you know, you take away parking spot, and people just, like, you know, go crazy. It's like you've robbed them. Yeah.
Territory.
It's their territory. It's very territorial. And so, but what we repurposed, you know, parking and took it back. We also we priced parking differently. We did a Park Smart program where we charged higher rates for different times of day to clear out the parking and improve the access to it. And actually, that became a community-requested program. And in fact, the Department of Transportation can't keep up with the demand. So again, showing what's possible, because businesses understood that it was actually much more valuable to have more customers coming in and using those spots than having one 2,000-pound car parked there all day long. So these kinds of, you know, programs, which we again started out trying out and then moved forward with and actually then asked communities to apply for them, really changed the buy-in. And you get beyond the traditional, you know, no, I don't want it, never do I want it kind of a dialogue that too many conversations and issues devolve into.
But even Bloomberg couldn't get congestion charging for Manhattan.
Well, that was because our overlords in the state didn't let us pass it. We have to get state legislation for whenever we're collecting revenues. And so, but we got it. A majority of New Yorkers supported it. All of the newspapers in New York City, which is practically a miracle. That's talking about Moses parting the sea when all the New York papers agree on anything. And we got it through the city council. And when it went up to Albany, actually, you know, the guy that ran it is now under indictment. And so we have a little problem with that. And so he didn't go for a vote and it didn't get through. But, you know, it changed the conversation about how people get around New York City. It was, and I do think that it's a matter of when and not a matter of if. And, you know, one of the problems actually was, you know, terrible phrasing, congestion pricing. Like, ooh, nobody wants that. congestion, or pricing, right? Terrible. Branding, awful, terrible branding. So the new idea is called Move New York, which I think has got a much better shot.
But inevitable.
Inevitable.
We're going to quote you on that.
Inevitable.
Okay. How do we get more families on bikes?
Build safer streets.
Yeah.
Build protected bike lanes.
I didn't think I'd get through all my questions.
All right.
I got through all my questions.
Nicely done.
Thank you. What a pleasure to have you back again.
What a wonderful place to come to. I accept.
Yeah. Deal.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
That was great. And I hope you're going to accept the same. And the reason why Seth is so good is because he's told me to remind you that the books are for sale out in the lobby.
Oh, yeah.
And Janette will sign them. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was a great day.